When one person gets diagnosed, the whole family lives with the condition. In this episode, we're talking about how to care for someone else without losing your own health, your purpose, or your way. Welcome to WellWaveNOW, your portal for actionable wellness insights. We, Breck Rice, Dr. Bob Levine, and myself, Tim Daniels, are your wellness catalysts committed to elevating your health, enhancing your functionality, and optimizing your performance at every life stage. WellWaveNOW, where timeless wisdom lights your wellness path. Today, it's our pleasure to have with us Katherine Autin. She's a 43-year visionary entrepreneur, Parkinson expert, and board-certified patient advocate. She is the founder of both Visionary Caregivers and Parkinson's Partners. As a 24/7 caregiver for her husband since 2004, she's built a career helping others navigate the challenges of caregiving with education, tools, support, and inspiration, all while thriving herself.
Hey, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on as our guest, Katherine. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. Whenever I get a chance to talk about how I can help people through their journeys.
Yeah, and Tim, that introduction, wow, that really sets the stage for our discussion today. So I'm looking forward to diving into this and give our listening audience and our viewers a better understanding of the more than 53 million Americans that are unpaid. They're just family members, right? Unpaid, that are giving care to someone, a loved one in their own home. 53 million Americans that are doing this on a daily basis. So roughly 6 out of 10 happen to be women, like our guest today. And so we want to spend some time on that as well as we talk about this discussion. But and that's the reason why this episode is a part of our Women's Health series. And we look forward to the discussion with Katherine. So tell us more about your story. And Tim gave the overview, but man, since 2004, I didn't realize it was that long.
Yes. Well, my story starts actually, I'm a 43-year entrepreneur, and my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2004. But when he was diagnosed, the doctor did all the regular tests, touch your nose to your finger and all that stuff. He looked at him after he'd walked a little bit. I think you have Parkinson's, he says. And I didn't know anything about Parkinson's at that time. And honestly, my husband was so afraid that he was losing his mind because when he spoke, he was a director of the International Division of the U.S. Department of Commerce's office in Louisville, Kentucky, where we lived. And he would be giving speeches for an hour, usually with no trouble. And all of a sudden, he started stuttering, repeating himself. He was visibly nervous. And I kept thinking, something else is wrong. And all of that led to this diagnosis of him being diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Great.
But what was
So Catherine on that. So I love how you focus that you're, when as you know, I ran a home care agency for the elderly for myself for 8 years, and
right?
got involved in care. And I love how you, as a primary family caregiver, still focus on your husband and how it impacted him and what you saw at the start. That said, love to understand, what was your reaction and how did your life change with that diagnosis, and what was the impact on you, Katherine?
Well, at the time, our son was 23. We have one child. I'd had 6 miscarriages, and I have a miracle kid. And when my husband was diagnosed, I kept thinking about our son. First of all, I wondered if he would get it. That was one of my concerns. But I also looked at my husband, and because he didn't have the tremor, you couldn't see a lot of the symptoms that he had. And so my first thought was, this can't be right. But then I realized, yeah, all those other things that had been going on that we didn't recognize, like his voice was getting lower. He couldn't use his fingers as well. He had rigidity in his neck and back where I was constantly having to massage him because he was in pain. And I didn't understand that that was neurological until he was diagnosed, and it all came together. And I kind of freaked out, I'll be honest with you.
Mhm.
But when we walked out of the doctor's office, and this was a movement disorder specialist, I had no idea there was such a thing. I knew there were neurologists. What I learned about the movement disorder specialist was really important, though, through our entire journey, is that they go 2 years above being a neurologist, 2 years as a fellow in movement disorders. And the statistics that I know of, people do better when they work with a movement disorder specialist.
Right. So
And
you got that disorder specialist. So how did you find out about this what that specialist in terms of what they did. So I'm still trying to get at Catherine. So you still so much care for everybody else. But part of this, right, is one to help out people understand how you educated yourself, and
Right.
we really talk about what you experienced and how you handled it, and how you've and I will get into it more. But so people might listening right now might say Catherine just is still all consumed by this, and you're dedicated to it, but you've built a life of thriving yourself and purpose in this environment.
Yeah,
And
obviously.
that's what we really want to kind of hear and make sure we get that out to people
Yeah,
as well. Okay, Catherine.
obviously there was
So
your own personal toll too, is what, Tim's getting at.
absolutely.
So
Um,
emotionally, physically, what was that like for you?
I'd been an entrepreneur since 1982. I started my first business when my son was less than 6 months old as a jewelry designer. And for years, that's what I had done in between working other jobs because we had lived in New Orleans for a while and then we moved here to Louisville. And I think the hardest part for me was thinking, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, I don't know how to take care of someone, I'm not trained. And it scared the bejesus out of me. I was so frightened. And I called everyone I could think of after the diagnosis. But what was the most scary thing was when we actually walked out of the doctor's office, the last thing he said to us was, here's your medicine. Call me in a couple of weeks. Let me know if it's helping you. If it does, then I've diagnosed you, properly. Otherwise, we'll have to look at a different diagnosis. And then his final statement, I'll see you in a year. And as we were walking out the door, we looked at each other and said, now what? And I just said, oh my God, what the hell? Do people get a diagnosis and then walk out and just go, bye? No, no advice on any kind of support groups. I had actually asked for one of the books to take home that was in the bookshelf that the nurse had. It was the Parkinson's for Dummies book, and I took that with me. People don't believe that it does exist, and I took it with me. And quite frankly, you guys, I was an entrepreneur. I had been through lots of different things with my business, and I kind of walked out thinking, okay, well, let me be stoic about this and let's just do what we have to do. And then about a day later, I fell apart and I didn't know what to do. We did talk to our son. I don't think he had any idea what this was all about because we didn't either, not yet.
Mhm.
But my husband was very calm and he was like, okay, okay. And I'm over on the side shaking and my heart was pounding and I'm thinking, okay, now what do I do? It was all about how do I run my business? Because at first I was thinking, oh, I'm going to have to stop my business. How am I going to do that? And so I decided, no, I'm not going to stop the business, not right now. Let's see what goes on. I made the decision almost from the very beginning to give myself permission to continue to run my business, to continue to find joy in my life. And as a jewelry designer, it brought me joy. I still love designing jewelry. I still do.
I was going to ask if
Yeah.
those were some
Yes,
earrings
these are
you
mine.
made and your necklace.
And
Yeah.
Yes.
we want to put some on Dr. Bob, so you got to get some. You got
Yep.
to send some to Dr. Bob here too.
Okay.
He's like Mr. He's as rugged and tough as Mr. Clean. And I think Mr. Clean used to have a little earring there. We want to hear what you have too.
But I really did have to, and I'm looking back now. It's been 21 years since he was diagnosed. He was actually diagnosed April 3rd of 2004. And when I look back at that, all I can think of was how frightened I was and how I had no idea if there were resources. I talked to a friend a couple of days later and she said, oh, well, somebody at GE knows of a Parkinson group that you can connect with locally. And that was the beginning of changing my life dramatically
That had to help a
because
lot, right? That had to help enormously.
it did. And they weren't, I have to be honest, they were great, but they didn't have anybody who was totally what I'd call a Parkinson's expert, which is what I've become. Everybody was kind of taking it day at a time to learn. And almost from the get-go, because my husband was diagnosed at 51, and he was one of the youngest
Yeah, it's
in
on
the
the young side.
community.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was young onset. And so they asked me to immediately start running support groups. And I'm like, sure, whatever you need, I'll do it. And that's how I started learning about Parkinson's and how everyone had a different experience. And it also brought me joy to be able to help those folks, to listen to what was going on with them, and to bring them information that I was finding.
So I
So, go ahead, Dr. Bob.
Well, I just wanted to jump in here for a moment to ask you, what advice, this is probably going to be asked over and over again, but what advice do you have in the beginning stages when you were so flipped out about it, so to speak, and it was such a problem for you? And what do you think made the biggest difference? You know, you transitioned, you got some education, you joined a support group, you found out that those people, didn't really have an expert in the group. When did you start feeling a lot more comfortable? And how would you become comfortable faster? I'm going to ask, because that's really what's critical. There's so many caregivers out there that are just oftentimes have been struggling with the whole caregiving process. And so the faster somebody can get from where you started with the to
Right.
To wow, I can really do this. What would you say to accelerate that process?
I mean, one thing as you think about and respond to that, put in front of that a little bit, prefaces part of that, more on your response earlier about one of the first things you did was give yourself permission to still be happy and have joy. What did that entail and to do that as well?
That was a very difficult time because I didn't know what to expect. I had nothing to go by except for the book that said Parkinson's for Dummies. And quite honestly, in reading books to learn about Parkinson's, it's not the best thing. I would never recommend it because that book, I had to go on a plane a couple of days after he was diagnosed for business. And quite frankly, I don't even remember now where I went. But I was reading that book and it was everything that could possibly happen to anybody with Parkinson's. And I cried the whole flight. I had tears in my eyes just streaming because everything that happens, and they don't tell you that everyone has a different experience. Like
Right.
your loved one.
Okay, and then that's very key. But one other key point on this, because we've said Parkinson's about 300 times so far. But
Sorry.
I don't, and no, that's good. But I don't want to
Right.
drive anybody in the audience away. What
Right.
Katherine was talking about and articulating, I think, is almost universal, whether or not the loved one you're dealing with has chronic regional pain syndrome, or they have severe rheumatoid arthritis, or whether they've had a stroke. The recipe that she's going through here is applicable for everybody. So sorry to interrupt you, Katherine, but
No, that's fine.
That's a great
My
point, Ken.
and my point in this is that I did the wrong thing. I didn't have anybody to guide me. I picked up a book that I thought I would learn about Parkinson's and then, oh, now I can help my husband. What I didn't know was that he probably wasn't going to have all of those symptoms.
Yep.
So I scared myself to death for no reason. And the most important thing that I did after that was start running these support groups. Because from everyone else that was having Parkinson's or was a caregiver, I learned the journey.
Would you say that attending the support group is at least as effective as leading the support group? Because everybody's there. I just want people, I'm encouraging people to go and get to a support group. You don't have to lead the group. You got to get there, right?
No.
Yeah.
That was me. That's my personality. I'm a leader, so I'm always trying to help. The support group is so important because you get a chance to talk about things that you're scared about, but you can also watch people, see how they're responding, and talk to the other caregivers. The groups that I was running, it was both caregivers, family members, sometimes it was just community members wanting to learn, but it was the people with the disease as well. And so asking them questions like, what kind of medication are you taking? What are your side effects? What is helping you? And what have you found that's a problem? Those were all key things that led me in the direction to ultimately become a board certified patient advocate and a Parkinson's expert, because those things are not well known. And you learn them from a support group. But I did that I'm still running a support group. I think the bottom line, when you're a caregiver and your loved one gets a diagnosis or they have an emergency in the hospital and then you're told, hey, their life has changed for the rest of their lives. You're going to be responsible for them. It's the same thing. It's fear. It's concern that maybe you're not up to the task. The other is finding team members. And this is something I stress all the time. As a caregiver, yes, you want to find a team that's going to care for your loved one, but you as a caregiver must develop your own care team.
Yeah. So two key points that I want to make sure that the listening audience understands. First, from Tim, that this episode is about caregivers in general. We know your focus and expertise is in Parkinson's, and so a lot of the focus will be there. But Katherine, you also brought up a very important point when you said you read a book and it said all of the horrible things that potentially could happen, but everyone's DNA is completely different. Everyone's symptoms are completely different. People are going to experience different, you know, disease states differently. And so we can get into that circle of heck, right? Where we're just,
Right.
we're just thinking, oh, all the worst is going to happen. And it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be that way. And so we can overthink things. So when someone first becomes a caregiver, now that you've had many, many years of experience, what is that most important thing a new caregiver needs to know?
What I tell people, because I feel this now that I've been through all of this, is never assume anything about your loved one's situation without double checking. And the reason I say that is sometimes your loved one may be diagnosed with one condition and you think, okay, well, that's it. Now we know what to do. But in many cases, there are other conditions that occur along the way. You don't know when. And one of the things that caregivers not sure about what to do is, when do you call the hospital? When do you call the doctor? If you see a side effect from the medication, what are you supposed to do? Those were some of the things I had to learn really quickly. And it doesn't matter what disease it is, whether it's cancer or a stroke or whatever. There are so many things that happen, and they usually happen on weekends when the doctors are not available. And you're thinking, do I wait till Monday? It's Saturday. These are things you have to learn right from the get-go. And part of that is always be prepared for emergencies. From day one, you make sure you have your medication list and keep it updated. You make sure that you have the list of symptoms and side effects that you're noticing your loved one is experiencing. You also need to seriously make sure that you have a bag packed in case there's a hospital visit. And it's not just if they fall or they hurt themselves, but medication errors occur frequently. And a lot of people end up in the hospital because a medication interacted with another one. Or it could have also been a supplement that they took that maybe thinned their blood too much. There's just so many things. So I keep a list of medications. I keep a list of his doctors, their phone numbers, and it's all in a bag. And it was one of the first things I did. The other is, you don't know how fast or how slow things are going to happen. So never assume, the doctor can say, well, I think it's going to be a 5-year journey. Don't assume that that's correct, because nobody, but maybe God, maybe knows what our end of life is. Oh. And for these 21 years, I have been prepared to take him to the hospital, and we have been there. In fact, we were there 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So that's been critical to execute, to learning to be the level and provide the level of care and advocacy for your husband that you wanted. I imagine it's also that preparedness has been critical to helping you maintain your own kind of physical, mental sanity. But you also alluded to something earlier on, a little while ago, that says, have a care team for yourself. So how have you found, so what's essential to you, aside from being prepared and knowledgeable, what's essential to you to maintain your own physical and mental health throughout the caregiving process, Katherine?
Well, it is a process, and I think don't expect too much of yourself at first. You have to give yourself grace. Nobody knows exactly what to do when you become a caregiver. You can get some guidance, but every situation is different. And I think for me personally, what I needed to do was when I was overwhelmed, I had to find a way to release my stress. And what I did, which is very unique, is I kind of regressed and I found there's a lake near us that has a swing that swings over the lake and you can see the ducks. And I love water, it calms me. So I would go and I would swing and cry and get that anxiety and fear out of me. And I would do that for maybe half an hour and I would scream sometimes. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to I just needed to get it out. And you have to, because it will eat you alive. The fear and the anxiety and the depression. I believe I've been in low level depression for years and what I call pre-grief, because again, you don't know when the end is coming. You have no idea. So I would swing and cry. And then once I cleared it out of my system, I would be, oh yeah, he's at home. I need to go home. I would drive myself back and then start over again. And you have to give yourself that grace. But you also have to find ways to get respite. That's how I've kept my sanity over these 21 years. I have found different ways. For the most part, the last maybe 10 years, I've needed more help from my husband in different ways. But before that, I was able to do some of the things, be gone for a few hours at a time. So I would go to meetings, I would do trade shows or whatever I needed to do. Ultimately, I actually decided I call myself the pivot queen because after my husband was diagnosed, within a few months, I decided that I needed to back off from my 24/7 jewelry company and redesign it, remake it into something that was more manageable, where I didn't have to travel all over the place. And I created a consulting firm to help businesses like mine um, go through their journeys. And that gave me a little bit of extra because, again, I'm one of these people, I'm very creative, but I have to help people. You can tell. I'm pushed that way.
So,
and that helped me.
Yeah, good. So going down that path a little bit, I want to say, is that's key where I think you took that time and sort of redesigned your business because I imagine what I saw a lot. We've never, although we've known each other a few years, we've never talked about
Right.
inner thinking before. I noticed with other caregivers when I was in that in-home care business that many of them had a kind of a sense of a guilt about that happening to their loved one and that sense of guilt about the joy. You can,
Yeah.
if you did, how'd you handle that? But even more important, even aside from that, what you also talked about in there just a second ago, how you kept your own identity, part of your own identity. And we can all feel now that you really have become an expert in caregiving. You've got a book we'll talk about a little bit later. You've got some other things. You've become that expert. So I don't know if you've merged your identity with caring for your husband or if you still have some separate, but somehow you've still got your own identity. It's not solely I'm my husband's caregiver. So how did you handle the guilt if you did have it? And and then how did you keep that sense of identity for yourself?
Well, let's look at this. Every family dynamic, if you're a family caregiver, that's going to determine, I think, how you keep your identity. In my case, since I started my business in 1982, he's always been there supporting me. And even though he was going through some really difficult times, he wanted me to be happy. And he supported me in continuing the jewelry, which I'm still doing today. And he also supported my need to help people. So when I was gone for running a support group for a couple of hours, he would always ask me when I came home, was it a good meeting? Did a lot of people come? And that helped me not feel so guilty. But there were other times when I would come home, and I would literally come home and he was stuck in his chair. He had not been out of his chair for an hour and a half, and he was not happy. And the guilt would just pour over me. And then I would think, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing these things. And I had to come to, and this is a very hard, very fine line for everyone, but you have to come to the conclusion that if you don't do well, both emotionally, physically, and spiritually, like your identity, your loved one is not going to do well either, because they will sense it, and then they will feel that it's their fault and they're a burden. And that's not good.
Yeah, it's a
Because
little bit like the flight attendant telling you to put the oxygen mask on you first before helping someone else. Because if you pass out, you're not going to be able to help that other person. And it's very similar to you as a caregiver, right? You've got to take care of yourself as
Absolutely.
well.
And no matter what you try to do for your own health, it eventually does catch up with you. I've had a lot of health challenges in the last couple of years. And I think that's the stress and the anxiety. As a caregiver, many of us go through something I call it 24/7 alert, where I'll be sleeping. I sleep in the bedroom. My husband stays in the living room in his lift chair. He sleeps there because ultimately we couldn't get him in and out of the bed easily. And I will wake up in the night thinking that he's calling me. I'll run in there and he's fast asleep. My brain never really shuts off, which is not good for your health, but it's what happens when there's a long-term event like we're going through. And I discovered the other day, I have a 43-year-old son, and he's also a caregiver for his dad. And I discovered from him that when he has stayed with his dad when I'm gone, he's having the same effect. Like he's waking up thinking that his dad is calling him. And I don't know what you do about that. I've wondered if I guess you don't. It's in your brain. I think it's your subconscious telling you to wake up and check on him. Like as mothers, you automatically have this kind of snap to quickly, go check, go see what's going on. Same thing when you're caring for someone who has a chronic disease and they might need you at any moment. You stay on that 24/7 alert. So even when you're asleep, your brain is not completely asleep. And that's not good.
Yeah.
Dr. Bob, what would you say to that? You're on mute.
Sorry, in my workspace here, there's construction going on, so I was muting out all the hammering and nail driving. So I was very interested to hear all you had to say, Catherine. And I think for our listeners, one of the most important things, and what shocked me, is that 20% of America are caregivers. It's wild, So it's really an important topic, and the fact that you had so much fear, which is absolutely normal to experience. I think that your message of, to move beyond it as best you can, the fear, the anxiety, and any depressive symptoms or whatever's going on, the melancholy, moving beyond that is so important. And so the real question is how can people do that quickly? And I have a lot of thoughts about that. I'm not going to go into here because it's an extensive conversation, but that's people want to focus on, and maybe they need to seek treatment from other practitioners of sorts to see how they can get help in terms of moving beyond the fear, the anxiety, the stress, the melancholy, depression, etc. So that's one point that I think is really critical to make. And and then of course you're expressing the cost of how it's cost you from a health perspective. So that's really an important message for people to hear too.
Over time, things
Yeah.
happen. And I don't think you can avoid that. But what you can do is you've got to keep your sense of who you are and try to find joy in your life outside of the caregiving life. So when I get a chance, actually my son during COVID would stay with my husband for like 2 nights, and I would go to a hotel and just work on my book, which has now taken me more than 6 years, but
I
finally
understand.
published. And the other thing is I would take time and design jewelry. because the creative mind that I have needed that. I needed that. It was cathartic for me to design jewelry, even if it was just for myself. Like I designed these when I was in my first overnight trip to the hotel. Because I couldn't really go anywhere during COVID. I went to the hotel and I would just close the door and for 2 nights watch TV, relax, call friends. Sometimes I would have lunch with a friend, something that would make me happy.
And
And
that would be a good thing to do, plus or minus COVID. That would be a great thing for
yes,
people
oh
to do.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I needed to get away because I felt like I was a yo-yo. I was up and down all day, and yet I was still trying to run the house, take care of our dog, who's also sick, and then also write, do my two businesses. There was because in 2012 I started my company Parkinson Partners to be a patient advocate and a guide for people and their caregivers. And I was working hard. There were nights when I would get calls where at 2 o'clock in the morning I would have to run to the hospital because one of my clients needed me in the ER, and I would have to stay for 8 hours, and I felt guilty then.
Wow. I'm glad you brought up that program, or is it a foundation, Parkinson's Partners?
Parkinson Partners is a for-profit company I started in 2012
Okay.
because I'd been my husband's patient advocate, but I'd also been an advocate for hundreds of others that had come through my education programs and my support groups. And when I started Parkinson Partners, it was really to take on one patient and their family at a time. So I usually didn't have more than 2 or 3 groups that I would work with at a time on a consultant basis.
Mm-hmm. You've gone well beyond being just a caregiver now for your own loved one, your husband in this case. But now, let's really explore that. What led you to did you see the need? What led you to saying, hey, we're going to do Parkinson's Partners?
I was working with a nonprofit here in Louisville for Parkinson's, and I was running their support groups. I was running their education programs, and I kept seeing that that's just a short-term thing. People really need a patient advocate to help guide them through a journey. And so sometimes that journey would be 6 months, sometimes it would be 2 months. And a lot of times, what I try to do was get people to a point where they felt comfortable with what they needed to do, the exercise, how to communicate with their doctors, how to track what was going on, how to communicate with their families. I would do what I call kitchen table education. If I had a client, I would bring their family together in the kitchen and I would explain to them what their loved ones was experiencing as far as symptoms. I would teach them a little bit about Parkinson's, and then I would get their input on what they were expecting. And it helped them understand because they didn't, most people don't understand Parkinson's. How could you?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't live it or you don't live with it, how could you? But any disease, you need someone to help guide you. And so I needed to fill that gap that was not there. There was no one, and I don't know that there are really that many now, to guide you through the journey, not just here's some paper, here's some books, let's do the education, but then what do you do in between? And how do you work with someone to prepare for your doctor's appointment? And at that time, before COVID, I would go with my clients to the doctors with my prepared sheets of what their symptoms were, their side effects, all of that. But I was able to communicate with them and for them, and then help them get some clarity on what their next steps were. If they needed to prepare for palliative care, I've referred tons of people to palliative care because it can make a huge difference in how their loved ones do and also how they do as caregivers.
Yeah. And I think you gave what you described there as a good description and definition of a patient advocate. And I think to your point, it may differ by geographies in the U.S. or how many who's out there and what's there. But I think people should understand that is available out there. There are professional patient advocates. You got to understand people approach that differently in the scope of what they provide. So there's not necessarily a standard scope that everybody across the country applies to. So you sometimes have to do a little self-analysis to say, what do you need? But people should understand that there are patient advocates out there like Katherine that they can turn to and should turn to get that education, to get that guidance, to speed them through things, to help them build their own personal care, care team. The good ones will help you build your own personal care team, like you talked about, in addition to what to do for the one they're caring for. And then there are
Yes.
even, when you get up to the so that patient advocate can be for a child with cystic fibrosis. But then when you get up into the elderly realm, there are also geriatric care managers who go beyond that to help you in the planning that you can do as well
Right.
through that. So that's very, very key to know. Now, what I
And part of what you do though, when you're thinking about as a caregiver, you try to think like, what is it that you need to prepare for? And if you don't have somebody to give you guidance on that, you're kind of lost. You're like, well, hey, should we get a wheelchair now? He's still walking. When do we need a wheelchair? Do we need to move? Because we've got stairs in our house and he might fall down the stairs. You need somebody to assess that for you and also find out again what their expectations are.
Good.
Are there
Absolutely.
some care gaps though in knowledge that there even is assistance? Or do people think they're on their own, or are people aware that there are services out there like yours to support them?
No, most people have no idea.
Yeah, that's what I was
They have
thinking. So
they have no idea. I've always I started to develop something this is hard for me because over the years I wanted to start a nonprofit. After one of my clients passed away a few years ago, I started to work on a nonprofit to help people and to have a clearinghouse for the information that they could access to help them. And I ended up in the hospital. And it was an aha moment for me is that I had taken on too much, um, that I had pulmonary embolisms. And I was concerned that I was pushing myself beyond my limit as someone who I'm a superwoman, but you can't do it all. And so I was trying to run, I literally had put a board together and we had our plans, um, and I stopped it. And I kind of regret that looking back at it, but you can't regret not doing something. You have to just keep going. And it's the same thing in caregiving. There are times when we've been to the doctor and then I've gone home and said, oh, shoot, I should have asked this question. And if I'd had a patient advocate with me, I guiding me, because I'm focused this way when I'm personally involved as opposed to this way when I'm professionally involved. And that's hard to separate.
right.
But
I think, and so I think to Breck's question and to your comment there, I think your book probably talks to people about patient advocacy, more to term. And that's one thing, when I got into the home care business, I didn't realize all these resources were out there until I got into that. And that purpose of, I think what we're trying to do here a little bit is help getting that out, and Katherine's work in general. But the hospitals, so sometimes if the hospital, if one goes into a hospital and they have good discharge planners, the good discharge planners will tell you about the resources, but not all of them know. If you, some of there's senior centers in a lot of towns, but it varies by, Katherine's kind of giving her look. So I'm not saying they're all perfect, Katherine, but I'm saying it depends on the degree of skill, like in anything.
yes,
but there are very good senior centers. Well, this is more in the elderly population versus even people that have the young cystic fibrosis child. But good senior centers really run programs that talk about patient advocacy, geriatric care, and point places to Good,
right.
good towns have social services that you can call and get pointers on that. So I think it's just that people have got to, one, how we can get this awareness out more through this and other programs. But people also, one key thing you said early on, Katherine, is that people just got to start making calls when they get in the situation. If they make the calls and then call around enough, they will get linked from one thing to another to finally realize what's out there and maybe pull something all together for themselves.
It's true, but the mindset of a caregiver is something that we all have to think about. The fear, the confusion, the where do I go? Who can help me? I actually wrote a poem about that because looking back on this, I kept thinking I didn't know where to turn, who to talk to, what questions to ask. You don't know what you don't know. And the part about being a caregiver is at first you're thinking, well, I can do this myself. And most women, reality, most women try to do it themselves. We're brought up to nurture and do what it takes, do whatever it takes to help. And the reality of life is you need a team. And it's not just your doctor. You need physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. You need social workers. You need nurse navigators. You need various types of medical professionals, whether it's endocrinology, cardiac, whatever it is. You've got to have that team, and they need someone that knows how to communicate with them. So actually, with my visionary caregiver program,
Okay, now, Catherine, I'm just going to lead you into that.
no,
Jumping, but
this
so let's
this is
put
where
on
I'm going to help people
yes, hold
think
on one
about
second.
those.
Let me ask that question on that though. So I want to close off that one part. So you got the Parkinson's partners. The Parkinson's partners where you're the patient advocate now and help people. Now you've got this visionary caregivers thing. So I just want to give you the right intro to that, Catherine, and a good segue into it. So
Right.
differentiate visionary caregivers and then tell us what that provides and how you've created that.
Well, here's my life. I am a serial entrepreneur. And so I started the jewelry search in 1982. Then I changed it 28 years later. I started a different company. Then I became a business consultant. I have owned many different companies. So when I had Parkinson Partners, I already had my jewelry company going. And I was continuing that. Then I realized that I needed to help caregivers specifically. Yes, Parkinson's is one part of it, but the caregivers really needed the help so they could help their loved ones and themselves. And so I created a company, Visionary Caregivers, in the very beginning of COVID, before I knew it was COVID. In January of 2020, I started getting my LLC together. I only kept that company for less than a year. I think I closed it off. I did a virtual summit first, but the idea was to help caregivers have a connection, get the education, and get the tips and a, a process of thinking out of the box in solving their situations that they were in. And so that was my purpose in it. I had two other women who were in it with me. But again, in my life, as I had to pivot, I realized running three companies and being a caregiver was dangerous. It was not allowing me to spend the time I needed with my husband as things were progressing. And I realized too that in the environment that I was in, because it was mostly virtual at that time, it was much too difficult for me to do that. So I closed the business in, I believe it was 2021. Yeah. What I did instead was I started a mastermind for caregivers, and I ran that for 2 years virtually. And that was pretty amazing because what we did, I tried to get people to find that joy, to find something in their lives in the past that would bring that thought of what was it when you were a child that made you happy? You've got to find that joy as a child to keep the joy going in your life. And I think that's especially true for women. I don't know about guys, but for us, it was thinking back, like I used to love to swim. I've always been somewhat in the art world. I also was extremely interested in international affairs. That's what my degree is in, international studies and cross-cultural training. So I allowed myself to volunteer with groups that meant the world to me. So I was president of the United Nations Association group here in Louisville, which brought me nationally because I'm actually from the DC area. I'm not from here. And I worked on Capitol Hill and I know that area. So I led groups to Washington with the National Association of Women Business Owners. I did things that made me feel joy And I think that's really what purpose, the bottom line for me is one of the purposes of my visionary caregivers was, how do you find joy in your life outside of being a caregiver, whether it's volunteering on the phone or doing artistic work
Did you
or just helping people?
did you ever figure out how to have joy in your life while being a caregiver? That's one of the questions I have. Because I think
Yes.
that's important. How did you find joy being a caregiver? Because caregivers are spending hour upon hour upon hour of giving care. So it's like people who want to relieve stress by going to work out for 45 minutes somewhere. It's great for the
Right.
45 minutes, but then you go back into your life and everything shows
Yeah.
up. So you really got to find joy in your caregiving. And I think you can probably shed light on that for people and give a great message about how people might
Mhm.
do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's hard, and I will say that it changes from day to day. I have a mantra personally that I have to change my mindset every day. If I wake up and I'm depressed or anxious, I try to change my mindset to, I don't know what today's going to bring, but I'm going to bring the best to it I can. And so when my husband is sleeping is when I am on Facebook and doing my business. When he is eating, I will sometimes make phone calls. And when I have a few hours, when my son is here, because he comes twice a week to give my husband a shower, um, I get to do things for an hour or two that I want to do. And it might be designing jewelry, or it might just be brainstorming,
Mm-hmm.
because I love to brainstorm about different ideas with my friends. So I have found a way to do this at home. And I also give myself a break now and then to go have lunch with friends, or my family isn't here, other than my son. My family's all over the United States. Um, but I think finding a way while you're caregiving, even if it's just a respite of half an hour or an hour to do, if you want to read or write or sing or design, as I do. I do less of the designing now because I actually had to have corneal transplant surgery about a month ago. And
Wow.
so I couldn't see for about a year. I've been struggling. I have a genetic disease that's progressive in my corneas. And so I was struggling, and I finally realized I can't do this anymore. So instead, I started a podcast. I started that actually Christmas Eve of 2024 because I wanted to share and talk about the journey that I've been on and to help people. And you keep coming back to, how do I find joy? I get joy out of helping people.
Yeah, we can clearly see that. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And we want to jump into your book, but before we do that, real quick, I have a question for Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob, have you tried this yet?
I haven't, but I need to. I want to.
It's called Neurogum. It's I heard about it on the #1 podcast in the world, and I thought, man, it's good enough for that show. It's definitely good enough for the WellWaveNOW show. It's full of nootropics for energy and focus, natural caffeine, vitamin B12, B6, and also has the amino acid L-theanine, so also known for its cognitive function. And it's sugar-free, tastes great. It refreshes your breath and your mind. It's called Neurogum again, and I've got a special for those listening in the TikTok shop. So now back to the show.
Okay, one thing before
Oh,
you
I
ask,
want to know more about that.
Breck will tell you, but one thing I want to ask before the book, I want to comment, is where Catherine stresses that find your breaks, and you find ability to get the breaks. And often people don't realize these resources are out there as well. Sometimes so in addition to family, there are, although it's becoming more well-known, still, when I got out of the business 2015, it still wasn't that well-known. You've got home care agencies that can come in and do respite care. If you can afford it, there are the assisted living facilities will take people for respite care to put them there. There are also sometimes volunteers, if one can't afford it, that the towns know of will provide that. So again, it's use that patient, it's call around, find that patient advocate, be able to identify that. And as to meet that key critical thing that Catherine mentioned about, find some way to get yourself some respite and some breaks. And back to you, Breck.
I just want to say one thing. Can I jump in real quick? There's an episode that we did. Tim's not going to believe that I'm bringing this up, but there's an episode that we did called about movement snacks, and I think it's highly relevant because there's just things you can do around the house in your chair, standing up, and it takes a minute or two. So I encourage everybody to go check out our movement snack episode, which they can find. Tell them where they can find it, Tim.
They can find it at YouTube. It's at youtube.com, YouTube at wellnesswaveclub.com.
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah,
Movement snacks. I love it.
I know it took me a long time for me to align with Tim that I could actually deal with that phrase, but I'm dealing with it now and I'm bringing it up. So
yeah, Bob and I are like Haley's comment. Every 75 years, we kind of pass
a line. Yeah. That's great.
Well, I
think it's more like every 75 days, Tim. I think it's
a little faster than Haley's comment. That's good. Yeah. But, so what inspired the book, and also what will the readers find? What are you covering in your book?
Well, it's my journey, but it's also a teaching book for caregivers. And throughout the journey, I'm talking about not just me as a caregiver, but I'm also talking about my son, our friends who traveled with us around the world with Parkinson's for many years while my husband could travel. We don't travel anymore. But it's also tips and ideas. So at the end of most chapters, there's a section that says tips from a spouse caregiver. What you don't know makes all the difference. And there are key things that I have learned over the years that I just want to give people a little thought of, if you go to the doctor, ask these questions. If you get new medication, check these things. If you're traveling, boy, is that a big one.
Yeah, sure. Nice. That's really great though. Because that's people don't think about, what tips do they need? They don't think about that. And then when they get your book, they're going to be able to realize that.
Yeah. And it is a very difficult journey for some people to read, I'm sure, because there's a lot of things that happen in here that nobody would even have any clue about. But then there's also some fun things. And the most important thing for me is my husband inspires me every day, the way that he handles this. He calls himself Parkinson's defiant, and he truly is. And I'll tell you more about that as just before we end, because we got some sad news on Friday. And the reality for us was enjoy life while you can. Do the things you can while you can. So we have traveled quite a bit in various parts of the world. And it meant the world to my husband. He did these bucket list things. And so in the book, there's that. There's also the whole journey of what we call the medication battle, because every medication has side effects.
You're talking to the scary drug facts guy, Breck, who's always out there on TikTok and other places talking about the scary drug facts. And so, and what's that phrase you have? If the side effects
outweigh the benefits, it's time to do something different.
Absolutely, and that's what I track everything that my husband does every single day, and it's been the best way to work with the doctors and everyone that works with him. But it also keeps the caregivers clear on what's going on and what has changed. But this book, I'll show you. This is the book. It just came out on April 28th.
Nice. Congratulations.
The Unexpected Detour, is that what it's called? What's the first word I see? Unexpected Detour. Is it called The Unexpected Detour?
My Unexpected
Detour. And you can find that on Amazon, right?
On Amazon. It's My Unexpected Detour, Becoming a Parkinson's Expert and Patient Advocate the Hard Way.
Yeah.
So my question, before we end, I really am interested to hear about the information and before other people may be jumping off, I'd like to hear about the difficulty you just heard, the information you just heard that you're saying is you have bad news.
Yeah. Well, and this is where never assume you know what's going on, because until you double check it, you don't know. A couple of weeks ago, my husband had to go in the hospital. He had lost his ability to speak about 9 weeks ago. I thought it was aspiration. I thought it was possibly walking pneumonia, something like that. Lungs were clear. And the nurse practitioner who oversees him said, we'll just see how it goes. And here's some cough medicine, because he had a slight cough. Nothing was coming up. So after I got back from my corneal transplant surgery 2 weeks ago, 2 days afterwards, he was in the hospital for 3 days. And the clue, he was having a cough that was spasmodic and it wouldn't stop, but he was having pain in his left side, up at the very top of his lung. And so I thought, ER, let's find out what's going on. And off we went. Well, my husband was diagnosed on Friday with thyroid cancer and stage 4 lung cancer.
Wow. Wow.
And he is deciding, I've been digging into things, getting as much research done as I can, what he wants to do. They want to do chemo for the lung cancer. He has multiple lesions, and it's a sarcoma, and it is very aggressive.
Wow.
So they're not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything about the thyroid right now. They want to handle the lung cancer. But my husband is,
I
yes.
just want to say, I've been exploring. I have some friends that are experiencing some cancers, and I've been exploring a lot about that. And if you wanted to have a conversation offline about that,
I would love to.
You can check my number there and my information, and we can.
Yes, I appreciate that. I'm digging into, obviously I have a lot of resources here. I'm also asking for a second opinion, but we don't have much time. They told him if he does not do chemo, maybe 4 to 6 months, maybe.
Wow. I'm so sorry to hear that, Katherine.
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you. And I think I'm still kind of in shock, but again, this is where, and I'm just going to say this.
My mother, my mother was in the same, almost the exact diagnosis. And we did some things that had her extend her lifespan quite some time and brought her back somewhat from it. So we can talk about that.
I would like to. I've done a bit of research. I think there's some things going on overseas that might make a difference, but I think I'm someone who's always turning over the rocks to see what else is out there.
Yeah.
And
Smart.
so, I think I've looked at CBD oil. We already got some of that for him to try, and we're going to put a little THC in there to see. He's not in any pain per se. It's just the spasmodic cough is weakening him.
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with right now is his feeling. He's not freaking out. This is not a man who freaks out. He's just like, well, he said the cough might take me before anything else. That's how he's thinking. And so, these are really hard things to talk about, but if we don't talk about them, how do we learn about them?
Exactly. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah,
I can't believe our time is already spent. It's been so enlightening to be with you, and so sorry to hear about your recent diagnosis for your husband. Is there anything else we haven't covered that we really feel like our listeners need to hear, or what are, practically, what are, 2 or 3 things that someone, a caregiver, could do daily just to stay grounded?
Well, let me tell you first, I do have a podcast. If people want to listen to a little bit of my story, I also interview other people who have chronic diseases and other caregivers. It's called Visionary Caregivers Show with Katherine Autin. And there's 8 episodes up there, but I think that that's a really quick way to learn some things because I talk about caregiving throughout, and I also interview my guests like you are. I really do think the most important thing is find yourself your care team. Make sure you're working with doctors that you trust because you can always find a different doctor or a naturopath or whoever you want to work with. And I do think that you need to reach out when you need help. Don't feel guilty. There's nothing wrong with reaching out for help. And a lot of women, especially, do not reach out because they think they can do it all themselves. I only just recently started working with a counselor myself, and I wish I had done that years ago.
That's important. Thank you for saying
so important. Yeah. Katherine, how do people contact you?
They can reach me, and I'm going to give you my phone number because I'm fine with people calling me. It's 502-314-8307. Again, that's 502-314-8307. And you can email me at KAUTIN@AOL.com. If you want to text me, call me, whatever, I'm open to it because I'm trying to teach and share as much as I can.
Well, Katherine, thank you so much for being our guest today. And thank you for showing us how it's possible to be a caregiver when guided by purpose, passion, and most importantly, compassion, right? And to our audience, I think the lesson here is that you can care deeply without losing yourself. So thank you for being our guest today. And until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and remember, wellness, it's in you.